Welcome to another edition of Life's Journeys. I'm Dr. Ralph Smith. As you know, in the past shows that we have done, and most of which we're really proud of, quite frankly, it gives you advice, it gives you suggestions on how to live a better life. And that's the whole purpose of it. So if you watch these shows enough, you don't have to pay me $200 or $300 an hour or some other psychologist. So we hope that you enjoy the shows, and I want to thank everyone for their wonderful response to these shows. I'm getting calls and emails. A lot of people are visiting our website, which of course is jenniemwellness.com with a G for Jenny. Or you can Google search myself, or you can Google search Jenny Marie Wellness. But we appreciate the response, and we're very proud to announce that now our programs are in Thurston County, which is a large county that houses our state capital in Olympia, and also Lacey, Washington. And then beginning next month, we'll be all over southwest Idaho with the addition of Cable One. And that's going to put us at over 150,000 households. And that makes us very proud, because when we first started, we happened to be in the studios at Papa here in Port Angeles. We were struggling like everybody else just to get the shows on the air. And now we've expanded out to 150,000 households. And for each and every one of you, we thank you for that. And of course, Sean Bennett, who makes all the magic happen. This segment is dealing with something that is very serious. I usually put a disclaimer in and say not for consumption of people under 16, but instead, I'm going to recommend to you that all of your children, no matter what age they are, that they do watch this program, because there's some valuable advice in it. There's going to be advice for you as parents and custodians of kids and adults, and it's going to bring to you a success story that is almost complete. We're going to be joined in the second segment by Craig Fulton, who is the Director of Public Works in Port Angeles. And I met Craig when I joined the Board of Directors of Papa back many moons ago. And one of the things I'd said to Craig, and also I said to Sherry Kidd in the Port Angeles City Council, is I only had two dreams, two objectives to meet in my moving here to Port Angeles, other than enjoying retirement, which I'm still waiting for that to happen. It's almost 5 years now. Number one was to help this community form Papa. It was very important that the community has a public voice, that they can talk about things. Kids can learn how to make films and have it on the air. And it's just a good, positive tool for the community to speak up without the violations of any commercial rules, of course, but without having to get the big city cameras out here, which is hard to do because we're on the end of the trail almost. Second thing was the bridge. The first time I moved to Port Angeles, the bridges were being torn down and rebuilt. And so I had to make that big long trip because I lived on the west side of Port Angeles instead of the east side that I now live. Upon my return, I noticed the bridges, and it was really wonderful. It cut my commute time a lot. But I also noticed it had a very short railing. Now, having been a doctor for 28 years and dealing with voluntary life termination, I knew immediately it was going to be a problem. So I contacted Sherry Kidd, and I said to Sherry, because of her role in Port Angeles, City Council, I said, why don't we have a rail that makes it more difficult for people to commit suicide? And she said, well, as a matter of fact, we have had that problem there. And I said, yes, it's very obvious and it's very easy. So I said, we really need to do something about this. And she stated to me in indirect term that if funding got toward kind of slow at the end, and that they had to get the bridge completed, and that's why they put in approximately a 4.5-foot rail, which Craig Fulton will address that issue. So we started talking about different things we could do, whether it be a survival net, whether it be just general netting, a lot of different ways to do it. And of course, that evil issue came up that we don't have the funding for it, and the city didn't have it. I talked to Bill Peach, who's also a contributor and a host on our network, who's the commissioner in Calhoun County. They didn't have it. And then fortunately, Mike had been newly elected as a representative, went to the state capitol, and he and Steve and all three of our representatives, actually, including Kevin, who's now a state senator in this district, went and fought for the money. And indeed, he got that money. So a combination of the money from the state with different grants, which money from the city, which Craig can explain all that. That's his expertise. We are now fixing that bridge. And why is it so traumatic? I've watched these people commit suicide. I managed to talk a person out of committing suicide on the bridge, but by the time you stop, and I don't move that well anymore in my old age, you cannot possibly reach that person, although the Port Angeles Police Department has saved 2 or 3 people from jumping that bridge. But the sad part that brought attention to this matter again was the death of Ashley, who was 15 years old. Yes, 15 years old, who decided that life wasn't there for her, and she was tired of the pain, and decided she ended. and she took that fall, which I think is an area of 100 to 120 feet in height over the highway below. And that seemed to wake the community up of what a serious problem it was, and it frustrated me tremendously. So I put together a proposal, which I sent to Sherry Kidd and the City Council, and I also sent a copy to Craig and one to Bill Peach, who is a commissioner. I said, we've got to do something. But it goes far beyond taking that bridge and trying to make it more difficult to commit suicide. It goes beyond that, reaching out, having the community resources and the help, and then carrying these folks forward in life. Because one of the constant determinations of people who decide they're going to take their life is basically the loss of life in their mind, emotionally, physically, and a lot of different aspects of it, where they just feel that the termination of their life is a better decision to make. Well, when you make that decision and you're 13 or 15 years old, it's really tragic. But the tragic story doesn't stop there. As Craig and his staff went out and sought bids, and he'll explain the process to you, and got everything lined up so that we can address this problem, a 68-year-old individual decided to make the same trip over that bridge. This is a crisis. And upon looking at the reviewing of the San Francisco Bay Bridge, Golden Gate Bridge, the Bay Bridge, they don't tend to have as many suicides, but they've built some protection into that. However, in the city of San Diego, or actually Coronado, the San Diego-Coronado Bridge has claimed 430 lives over the last 10 years. And the problem they're facing is much like Craig and his staff was facing, is that they have to get the funds in order to make those bridges more difficult for people who are intent on suicide. And that's going to cost in excess of $100 million. So our numbers may be smaller here, but the purpose of what we want to accomplish is not smaller. That's to give people the second shot at life when they feel their life is over. And that's our job, and folks like myself, psychiatrists, behavioral health people, is to get hold of these people and turn them around and convince them that indeed there is a life for them, no matter what their precarious position may be in their mind. So, as we get ready to take our first break, we'll return with Craig Fulton. He is, again, the Public Works Director for the City of Port Angeles, and he can share with you what it's been like since he's been the director and the things that they've had to go through, and hopefully a success story that we'll have hopefully this summer or early fall. Once again, you're watching Life's Journey with Dr. Ralph Smith, and we'll be back to you right after this short break. Well, welcome back from that short break, and I hope that you folks are tuned in to really understand what it's talking about, what we're talking about in voluntary life termination. And the important thing is, I try to avoid using the term suicide, even though that's what people use. But when Dr. Jack Kevorkian pushed so hard about having voluntary life termination, he wasn't talking about the situation we're doing now with life issues. He was talking about people who were chronically ill and had no chance to recover, and they were suffering tremendous pain, and families that quite frankly did not want to let them go. And the only people that makes happy is the hospitals and the insurance companies, as that meter runs and runs. Well, thank God now the state of Washington and the state of Oregon have laws that allow people to get an input and even make the decision to take their own lives. And I know that the state of Idaho is working on that, so that pretty well takes care of the Northwest. And I know we have viewers all over the United States and throughout the world with our internet connection. You need to check your local regulations to find out what applies there. So when we talk about things, we're talking about the Pacific Northwest. Well, first of all, I'd like to, in this segment, introduce Craig Fulton. He's the Director of Public Works in the city of Port Angeles, Washington. An absolute paradise to live in. I could have chose anywhere to live, and I picked Port Angeles because of the beauty of it. And then someday we'll talk in the final segment, or maybe later on today, final segment, about life termination and how the city of Port Angeles, through their EMTs and the wonderful hospital at Olympic Medical Center, saved my life. And quite frankly, when I had my massive stroke. So I owe this city and that hospital a great debt in allowing me to still be around. Some people may disagree with that. Well, welcome, Craig, to the show. I think that what I'd like to do is kind of give people a general description of what the Director of Public Works does in your position, because maybe every city's a little bit different, and then give us a little history on this bridge, because you've been here for a while and you have to deal with this day to day.
So I'm the Director of Public Works, and under the Director of Public Works you have all the utilities. We're a full service utility provider, which is unique for any kind of city. Water, wastewater, electric, stormwater. We also provide all the street maintenance We also have an engineering department which does the designs and oversees engineering contractors as we maintain and build out our utilities and infrastructure of the city. Also, equipment services also falls under Public Works.
Now, when did you actually start your position within?
So I've been here with the
Port
city 4 years now.
Okay.
So the projects to replace the two 8th Street bridges were complete several years before I arrived.
Okay. And that's probably a good thing, because I know there was a lot of controversy about it, cost overruns, and for people who lived on the west side, I now live on the east side of Port Angeles, what a major pain to get from city to city. It kind of gave us an advance warning of what will happen when the big earthquake hits, that have the city divided with all the bridges, if they go down. I think the last thing I read, we'll have 21 different islands of population. And boy, folks like yourself and the emergency preparedness people will have a big job to do.
And what's unique about the city council was very energetic and had a lot of forethought in addition to the previous public works director, to replace the bridges, because both the 8th Street bridges and the Lauriston Bridge are now earthquake. Were designed to new earthquake standards and should prevent the Port Angeles city, becoming an island in itself.
Right. Well, of course, not that this applies to our talk today, but the fact of having Fairchild Airport largely unused, but has those big long runways, that if indeed that airport can survive, and especially those runways,
Absolutely.
That's our number one avenue to get goods in here, and the other one would be by sea, and we're not back in the Paul Revere days, because there are a lot of bridges between Port Angeles and, let's say, Gig Harbor, and going even the other direction around Lake Crescent. So we depend heavily on that airport, and then if necessary, by sea. So something that we'll talk about in another show perhaps, and talk about emergency preparedness. But the real area that I want to focus on, and just because a lot of people don't know about Port Angeles, even though Sherry does a great job of the Positively Port Angeles show, it's the one most watched show on our network, which she makes sure I know that. And of course, you're one of the founding directors of PAPA. But what we want to do with, of course, our show is get a lot of information out to the local citizens and citizens throughout the region. So this bridge issue is a big issue, and I'm sure that other communities face it, but you never hear anything about it. I mean, look at Portland. I mean, my God, those big bridges over the Willamette River. But talk a little bit about the history of these bridges and why we're faced with this current dilemma. And then when we get done with that, we'll talk about some solutions.
Right, so the old bridges were crying out to be replaced. They were replaced 2007, 2008 timeframe, if I recall correctly. It was right in the middle of the economic crisis. The construction industry, materials industry was in flux. It was originally supposed to be a steel constructed bridge until the bids came in and way over any kind of funding we had available. So they went to a concrete bridge. Even with that, it stretched the bridge budget to the limit.
Right.
And so there was a decision to be made on what type of railing system would be put in. And the railing system that is in place now meets all federal and state regulations.
Yes.
For bicyclists and pedestrians and vehicles. But it does have issues. If someone wants to take their own life, they can get over it. So the city council, after the last 2 years, the recent suicides, made the decision to move forward and get a barrier put in place,
Right.
to prevent those folks who have, it might not prevent the determined suicide, but those who might be on the edge of making a decision, it will slow them down and allow someone else to intercede and intervene into the process and stop them from jumping over the bridge.
Yeah, and in all candor, the city or the county or whoever's in charge of those bridges there, I know it's within the city, they did try. They had a sign put up saying a suicide hotline number. They did different things that would get people to hopefully pause and think. However, having been a doctor for 28 years and dealing with people who are suicidal, they're not thinking about dialing an 800 number or an 888 number, or even having a cell phone with them for some reason. When they get that on their mind, that what we call the darker side takes over, and the ability to reason is just not there. Now, fortunately, behavioral health is down the street, so if they had enough warning to do it, they could get there. But we've had fellow citizens, and God bless them, they've been good Samaritans, have been able to stop and keep people from going over. Your Port Angeles Police Department's done that. But like you said, the ones that are determined are going to do it. And it's a tempting target because as people commit suicide, it enters their mind, well, I can do that too. And of course, they don't have to worry about surviving because this bridge spans a decent period of placement as far as amount of space. But in addition, it's 100, 120 feet above the next, the road below. And if someone commits suicide, someone's driving underneath, I don't think a car or a person's ever been hit like that, but it's inevitable. It's just too much of a tempting target. And you cannot totally eliminate termination, voluntary termination of life. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can go, from pills, guns, the exhaust pipe, in your car, in a garage. There's a lot of different ways to go. But for some reason, 8 individuals in recent history have chosen to take that route. Now, obviously you explained very well the history of it, what the city council is trying to do, and all those things. So now we have good news to share. And the good news to share is that instead of everybody throwing their hands up and saying, there's nothing I can do, this was done earlier when the bridge was built. They had to cut corners because the original bridge had a 7.5 foot, I believe, safety fence or safety shield. So people didn't think about that when you're trying to get the dang bridge done. Now the good news is funding's been established, and why don't you share with our viewing audience the wonderful news we have ahead, because now we have a solution.
Right, so we went through a deliberate process to come up with what type of fencing should be installed. We wanted it to fall within the funding that was available or the funding we could obtain. We also wanted architecturally pleasing as folks are walking and driving across it. We also looked at timelines. Do we do temporary fencing now, permanent fencing later? When we looked at those timelines, we figured out that permanent fencing is not much longer than temporary fencing.
Okay.
So we went through a deliberate process of safety, short-term construction costs, long-term maintenance costs, and we came up with a fencing that has a wave-like pattern that is architecturally pleasing. We sent that out for bids, and actually this afternoon at 2 o'clock is the bid opening.
Oh, wonderful.
Crossing our
timing's
fingers that
perfect.
it's within the funding available.
Excellent.
So we have a mixture of funding. The state has agreed to contribute $350,000.
Mm-hmm.
We have donations of over $120,000 from various parties, and then the remaining funding will come from the city. Now, all this funding comes from the general fund. As folks are aware, the general fund is fairly restricted on what's available and how much we have in reserves. So we had to make some tough decisions on delaying future projects to free up the money now to get this fencing.
But this is
summer.
life and death. I mean, are you able to attach any of the motel taxes or any of that type of taxes where tourists contribute? Is there any way you could access those funds?
Yeah, the city CFO and the city manager sat down, looked at all the various pots of money available, and we tapped into various pots of money that come into the city. There are restrictions on certain lodging tax fees, on what it can be used for, what it can't be used for. But we feel comfortable the city will have the money to make up the difference between what the state's providing, what the donations are providing, and we'll find out this afternoon what the bids are.
Well, that's excellent news, and I'm sure it'll appear in our local newspaper. The complication with this bridge is not only the height involved, where people know that if they try to commit suicide or voluntary life termination, it's probably inevitable. You don't jump from heights of that. That would be comparable to a 10 or 12-story building. But the problem that complicates this even more, besides the short railing, is the fact that you have both sides of the bridge, because people have access both sides, so they have an east-west transition. You've got a north and south exposure, and it's not just one bridge, you have 2 bridges. So it's not like, there's a lot of people who are not familiar with Port Angeles think, well, what is all this controversy? Just fix the dang bridge. Well, there's 2 bridges involved, and the exposure is such that you've got to fit, in a sense, 4 bridges as far as 4 railings. Was any thought given in any of the proposals that you reviewed about perhaps eliminating access on one side of each bridge and forcing people to walk on the other side? I know that had been talked about in the paper, and obvious danger is that's a very busy traffic area, and people can get hit.
That's really what was one of the largest concerns. If you shut down access to only one side. People will now have to cross a street, and as you're aware, 8th Street is very busy,
Yep.
and we probably have many more pedestrian vehicle incidences than we have now with
Yeah.
everybody crossing, because that bridge is used daytime and nighttime.
Oh, I noticed that.
Bicyclists, and it would be increasing the danger.
Now, I know you ride a bicycle, you're into that kind of stuff, and so this would be a good question to ask you, and then I'll ask about the timeline, and then we'll cut you loose, because you've got a big event coming up with the opening of the bids. Riding a bicycle on that bridge, if I remember right, and I've never walked the bridge, I attempted to get out once where the person was going to attempt suicide, and they managed to change their mind, so I didn't have to get out on it. But it's a rather narrow sidewalk, so for those critics out there that say to you, well, Mr. Fulton, you know, it might be inconvenient, people have to be careful crossing the street, and all these kind of things. But even using that one sidewalk, if a person was riding a bike, it doesn't leave much room for someone to pass. And I think people haven't thought about that.
Well, and the sidewalks really are not meant for bicyclists.
Oh, I know, but people use them.
So we do have 2 bike lanes on each side, and the sidewalks, but crossing the street would increase, in our estimation, pedestrian vehicle incidents.
No doubt. And I'll tell you, you're absolutely right. I am familiar with the bike lanes, but I can also tell you, having driven that bridge a lot of times, that bicyclists and those skateboarders, of course, they love using that sidewalk that's there next to the railing.
And
they
really,
feel safer.
yeah. And really, the bicyclists, you want them to bicycle with traffic.
That's
Once
absolutely
you
right.
have bicycle against traffic, you're doubling the impact speed if there is a head-on collision.
And boy, at night, it's really tricky through there.
Absolutely.
All right, so the last thing, and I'm not going to hold you to this, because I don't want you to get yourself in trouble, or the city council in trouble. What type of timeline are we looking at to get this problem fixed? Assuming one fact, that when you open the bids at 2 o'clock this afternoon, the bids do meet the criteria of what funds are available, and then it's a matter of picking the right one, and hopefully you'll have more than one choice, getting the right one and saying, okay, we're ready to do this thing.
Yeah.
What type of timeline?
So
are we looking at?
one of the things we have to consider is, first, do we have the money? And if we don't, how long will it take to get the money? After that, we'll be sitting down with the contractor and getting a better understanding of how long it's going to take to procure the materials and get them shipped here.
Right.
These materials are just not sitting here.
Right.
In Port Angeles, we've got to have them manufactured, shipped out here, and then once the materials are out here, we expect it won't take very long to install the fencing. So we're looking late summer. I'm expecting late summer to.
Well, that would be awesome.
Unless
And-
there's some other
Well, maybe
thing
we'll
we
get
haven't
lucky.
considered.
Well, the other thing is that I assume in these bids, there's also provision that people hopefully will be either a local company or a company that's in the Seattle, Tacoma area that can use local people if they have the expertise. Because as you're aware of, we have a high unemployment rate here in Calhoun County compared to the state. So it'd be nice to get local people involved with that too.
Yeah, I mean, we have to follow state bidding guidelines, so we can't dictate, the contractor must be from Port Angeles or must do this or that. It's open competition on best price, meeting the standards that we put in place in the contract.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Obviously, we'd love to have a local contractor win the bid, and many of our, especially civil projects, we have a lot of civil construction firms in the area, and they do win a lot of our contracts, which is great for a local
Super.
economy.
Well, again, as you and I both know, we've talked about it many times, and I appreciate you giving the consideration to the proposal I sent you. But voluntary life termination is a problem that's all through, from opioids to, it is a real problem. So the net of the problem, there's all the problems, not just to solve the bridge, it make it more difficult. You can't make it suicide-proof, but more difficult. But it's a fact to address this problem before it even enters one's mind. And then if you can intervene there, then of course giving them a new life path. And that's where I think the people in the mental wellness and mental health area have to step up and do their job. And forget about billing, because a lot of these people don't have the resources to pay for it. So I would hope that people out there, and I'm talking to all of you out there, and I've already volunteered myself in this, that we step up and do some pro bono work, much like the attorneys do, and we give these people a path to happiness. Because once Craig and his fine people and the city council and the county commission, all these people that have worked so hard, Mike in the legislature and the whole works, that is a good beginning, it's a good start, and it'll be a blessed thing to see that bridge done into summer, early fall. But it doesn't erase the problem of people being so dissatisfied with life that they choose the option to terminate their life. And we're going to talk more about that in the third segment. So once again, thank you, Craig, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And this is really a proud moment for me, because this is an example of your city, public servants per se, that aren't elected. They're there to do the job. They got it done. They addressed the issue, and this is on top of everything else they do. So a special kudos to Craig and his staff for what they're doing, and the city council driving that, including our good friend Sherry Kidd. All right, we'll be right back, and after this break, we'll talk about the checklist of what it takes to recognize a problem before it reaches a point where they head for that bridge. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to our final segment here in this episode of Life's Journey with Dr. Ralph Smith. And again, we appreciate the fact you're here, and we extend our welcome to you. It's really neat to be able to have what appears to be a success story in dealing with these bridges. This is something the city has dealt with a long time. I consider this my city now also, since I chose here to retire, although I'm still waiting to enjoy the benefits of retirement. It seems like I'm busier now than ever before. But to watch Craig Fulton, as Director of Public Works, generate his staff's efforts to go ahead and get this problem addressed when they have a lot of issues they're dealing with. I have worked with city and state and county projects before in my previous life, being involved with the legislature and all the different things I've done in my life, which I won't bore you with that. But I can assure you this, that the projects that Craig and his fine people are working on, and what Sherry Kidd and the city council are doing, we got our buddy Jim Moran on the city council now, so we got a lot of good people in there, and all these newies are fresh with ideas and fresh with the direction they want to take the city. Of course, Sissy's still there. But the point I'm trying to make is they work on projects that are years ahead. I mean, they probably go 5 or 10 years out. And I didn't ask Craig that question because I didn't want to put him on a spot. But to freeze everything, go through the effort of bidding, which they have requirements they have to do, and then to get those bids open this afternoon at 2 o'clock, and to get that done where we can stop this suicide being so easy to do on our 2 bridges is a huge accomplishment. And God bless him if he can get it done by the end of this summer and early fall. I know these shows are not dated, but this would be the year 2018 for those who are watching the show. But here's the point I want to make in my final summary for you, and these are my life points that I like to share with you. The question is not just to make suicide or voluntary life termination harder on a bridge. That issue is just to remove, in a sense, a game of checkers, remove a couple of chips off the board. It doesn't solve the overall problem. And the overall problem is recognizing people who are considering the option of ending their lives. And it's really tragic to have that happen at age 15 when you have so much life ahead. And this young lady probably didn't have the proper options to choose from for whatever reason. I don't know. She's not one of my patients. And then to have a 68-year-old individual who's lived all their life, who I'm sure has kids and maybe even a wife and grandkids and stuff, to make that same decision to jump the bridge, I think clearly tells us all who are tuned into this program, no matter where you are in the Pacific Northwest or throughout the country that we broadcast to, why can't we address this problem? What is standing in the way? It's much like the kids are doing in their marches in Washington, D.C. about wanting to have restrictions on guns. They want to have not necessarily gun control, but gun awareness to be able to limit obvious problems that crop up, whether it be the age to purchase a weapon, whether it be the easy availability to weapons, and then the people that use them are obviously not well. It doesn't take a genius or somebody with a doctorate degree to figure out that when someone approaches a group of people with a gun, they're making their decision based on whatever mental issues they're having to terminate life for others who didn't make that decision. So this country is faced with a lot of problems. But the problem we're addressing right now is how can we recognize people that might possibly take this option regardless. No matter what we do at the bridge, there's a lot of other options they can use, as I talked about in my introduction. How do we identify those people? And then once we identify those people without violating their rights, which is very tough, and we're going to bring another lawyer in one of our programs later on to talk about that. But how do you address that issue, identify the people, get them the help they need, and then turn them around to have a successful and a productive life? And as I said when Mr. Fulton was here being filmed, it's going to take a total commitment of the mental wellness and mental illness community without, thinking about their billing, statements of billing people for this or the government paying for it, to be available to help people that need this help. Because I can tell you the number one cause of voluntary life termination is the lack of access for mental wellness services. No matter how well-intentioned the agencies are, including our own, Jenny Murray Wellness, they have difficulty accessing those and then getting the time commitment and the people properly trained to turn them around. And quite frankly, suicide hotlines are important things. I'm all in favor of it. But there's probably 60 to 70% of people that when they use that hotline, they're still going to go forward and commit suicide. Maybe not jump off of one of Port Angeles' bridges or the San Diego Coronado Bridge in California, but they'll find another way to end their life. So what do? I'm going to give you a list. First of all, if you notice that individuals are pulling themselves out of everyday affairs, for example, if they spend a great deal of time in the bedroom, or they don't take active interest in their hobbies they love, or they stop going to work, or they stop displaying and receiving love, that's a big warning sign. And that's something I know you can apply to a lot of things. But this is an example of depression or the blues. This is a significant withdrawal from life. That's checklist item number 1. Checklist item number 2 is a lot of the folks, if they don't plan to continue to live, will not only disconnect their social relationships, but they start rejecting even proper hygiene because they take the attitude, well, why should I do all this stuff when I'm not going to be here much longer? So that's checklist item number 2. Number 3, if the individual seems very combative when they do come out of their room, and I'm talking about verbally or physically combative, that is giving you a big sign that there's an issue involved. And it's not a matter of simply throwing them in jail or prison. It's a matter of recognizing they're hurting and why they're hurting. So that is checklist item number 3. Checklist item number 4, if they have a financial downturn or if they go through a divorce or they have some serious health issues, when you are bombarded with those things, you do take the look at it and you say, you know what, I don't need this. I want to take the easy way out. And that's checklist item number 4. Checklist item number 5 is making them stay connected if they have a religious upbringing or they believe in the different spiritual faiths available, is get those professionals involved. Because most religions, including Christianity and Judaism and some of the other religions, consider suicide as the ultimate sin. So for those who believe that they're going to go forward and go to heaven, and I happen to believe that myself, it's an issue beyond good deeds and your church attendance and how much money you give at the church. It's a matter of being plugged in to realize you have something to give. So getting religious individuals and churches, having those doors open, and then having those pastors or the bishops or the ministers or the reverends involved to recognize these serious signs and then get hold of someone who's a professional in this area, that's very important too. Item number 6, and this will be the last item I give you. When someone withdraws from life, and that's not their personality, and they're hit by the other factors I just shared with you, that is all the warning signs you need. You need to get an active involvement in their life, reach out, and give them the physical love they need, and get them to plug back in. And if you think they're really suicidal, and you're not a professional, obviously, most people watch this, don't deal with this. If you think they're suicidal, seek help. Because the only way you can keep going is to get that individual to believe there's a future, that problems can be resolved, and that people depend on them. People need them. I've been there. I know what it's like in dealing with patients. And the big problem that all of them face is not only the downturns of life, because we all go through certain degrees of depression and having the blues, but that they just feel there's no one or nowhere to go continue their life, that no one depends on them. I always tell my patients who are showing signs of suicidal tendencies that the first thing I have them do is take pictures of their kids, if they have kids, or loved ones. Put it on their visor in their car, clip it on there, so that every time they start their car, they're going to look at those pictures and they ask themselves one question. What would life be like for these people that you love so much if you just decided to depart early, and especially if it's your own choosing? How is that going to be explained? How are you going to handle that, or how are they going to handle it? And what an awful way to end life. And a lot of people who connect with someone, whether it be this 15-year-old girl or that 68-year-old person, they're going to question themselves and probably need professional help, because they'll say, what could I have done to help that person before they jumped that bridge, cut their wrist, used a gun, filled up on pills, or went in the garage and hooked up a hose to their exhaust pipe and just died that way. It needs to be stopped. So I would encourage those out there who feel that they have this issue to deal with, that they give our corporate office a call. That phone number is, and I'll have Sean put it on our screen and our website. That phone number is 360-809-3444. And give us a call and let us help you. I don't care where you're at. We have connections throughout the country and even into Canada, up in British Columbia. Give us a call, let us help. And if you want to Google search us or Google search me, you simply Google search Dr. Ralph Smith, and Ralph is spelled R-A-L-P-H, or Jenny Marie Wellness Centers, and that's G-I-N-N-Y, Wellness Centers. You'll have all the information you need, and give us a call, and we'll do everything in our power to turn your life around. That's what our mission is, and that's the mission my mother set up before she passed 19 years ago, of why we created this Jenny Marie Wellness Centers. So give us a chance if you're out there, and you're feeling nobody cares about you, and that nobody wants to give you any help. Give us a chance to help you turn around your life. And don't worry about a bill, because you're not going to get one. On behalf of the entire staff at Alpine Productions, our parent company, and the Jenny Marie Wellness Centers throughout Idaho and Washington, and our good buddy Sean Bennett, who makes this all happen, we want to thank you for tuning into the program, and we encourage you to keep checking back with us with our new shows. We're now in our second season, and you can watch our shows worldwide by either going to YouTube and simply inputting Life Journey with Dr. Ralph Smith, or you can go to our own website at Jenny Marie Wellness, which is, of course, www.ginnymwellness.com, and you just simply click on a Life Journey, and you can catch your show whenever you want, 24/7. You take care of one another, and God bless.